Over on City of Heroes Homecoming, we've got given a new way to personalize your character, and that means more ways to represent different ideas for your superhero. These new costumes are available through a currency called prismatic shards, which means I tend to think of them or call them prismatic costumes. And they let you transform your character wholesale into a character that looks like a member of an enemy faction, which occasionally have specific tailored items or specialized body frames. You could hypothetically use a whole bunch of these costumes to represent a shape-shifting style character like your Morphs or your Mystique. Lots of forms and disguises. What you can do, though, and what I want to do with them, and what I am doing with them, is to use these character transformations to represent different types of character concepts, where they each distinctly transform into a single form that represents a form they use for combat or superpowers or a secret identity. I am a big fan of the transforming hero character. For me, one of the most interesting things in any role-playing space is something in that world to be connected to. Like factions, or houses, or organizations, or families, or guilds. Things that you can point to and say, that, as a starting place to tell your story. That's how these tools excite me particularly. So, I thought I'd do a quick rundown of some of the major factions in City of Heroes, to give you an idea of their vibes, and also take a chance to talk about the lore of this game that occupies a lot of my brain, and how I personally would go about expressing mechanics in a way that interests me to represent those characters. You like long lore videos? We'll see how long this one gets. First up though, I am going to skip over some of the factions where a transformation costume is probably slightly less interesting than the costumes you can use to make yourself with the existing character creations, power, and auras. This is a whole bunch of things where the character is essentially a guy. That means that we're flying past the Cage Consortium, the Cabal, the Knives of Artemis, the Legacy Chain, the Malta Operatives, the Praetorian Resistance, Scrapyarders, the Syndicate, the Warriors, and Wyvern. While a bunch of them have very specific, unique costume pieces, overall you can get most of the way with just the character options and get something that looks better and gives you more freedom with things like face, hair, and overall body style. I'm also skipping over the entirety of the fifth column, because the fifth column are actual Nazis following a supervillain called the Reichsman. The Council gets covered by that too, even though they are modeled on Italian fascists, which kind of makes them the Nazis you get on Wish. I mean, there's a whole conversation about the gang groups like the Hellions, the Outcasts, the Skulls, and the Trolls, and about how you can reinterpret them in different ways to make them more about the interesting narratives of what it means to belong to a gang in a superheroine setting. Kind of a surrogate governments being built out of low-level street powers. But on the other hand, more than one of those gangs requires you to eat a human corpse, or worse. So it's not as simple as, these gangs are actually good, and people are misrepresenting them because of neoliberal capitalism. It's got to be more complicated than that. And hey, maybe we'll have that conversation another time. There are also some characters I'm simplifying in terms of just being monsters, who you can use for generally not necessarily of this faction style of monstery thing. That covers the Arachnoids, the Banished Pantheon's zombies, the Circle of Thorns, Succubus, Hellfrost, and Demon, and the Cimarrorans, Cyclops, and Minotaurs. Hydra also kind of belong here because they just look like a great big oozy monster. Plus, Hydra as a faction is obscure enough that odds are good there are players who don't know what they look like at all. Also, finally, there are a bunch of costumes that let you turn into some kind of generic robot, with different degrees of complexity, which, again, often rely on costume pieces you have available to you in the character creator. So that includes the Arachnos BCU, the Clockworks, the Longbow Mender robot, the Warworks BCU, and the Sky-rated Jump bot. These all let you slot into their factions if you wanted to, but it could also be useful for making a character who's meant to be a hijacked or reprogrammed or rogue robot. I'm also skipping factions I find a little boring on their own, and I am gonna try and avoid major plot arc spoilers when I give you the impression of the culture of these factions. There are some places where the enemy factions are hiding secrets that make them a little more interesting, or in some cases a little less interesting. So I'm just gonna leave that stuff out and just try and give you the vibe of what kinds of things these are. First up, we have the Arachnos. Arachnos are the terrorist government / corporate government of a series of islands off the coast of America known as the Etoile Islands, or the Rogue Isles. It's the setting of City of Villains, and Arachnos are effectively the government infrastructure of this place. They are a totalitarian state with things like a psychic network for mind-controlling people, flyers, and militarized police forces. There's no difference between the military that goes and makes encroachment on other countries and the police that operate in their own cities. There are groups known as arbiters who have absolute power, who are considered to be politically untouchable in the context of the universe. Arachnos are a very well-explored, very deeply examined culture in the setting already, because in addition to having the center stage for so much of the storyline, they also are the source of the single-player story available in the Arachnos veteran archetypes, which is what you get if you play either a Spider or Widow class all the way through the game. Those classes are very easy to play and very strong, which means that lots of people have seen these stories and lots of people tend to have an idea of what Arachnos is like. Arachnos, as a setting element, is usually kind of fundamentally contradictory in that it will first project to an outsider a sort of uniform, absolute power, and very much a cackling evil, like we will slay the heroes kind of entity. But the culture of being in Arachnos very clearly sucks. It's like going to a dysfunctional corporate job where the printer doesn't work, but periodically you might get shot. There is already established in-universe schisms within Arachnos as it operates because the people in charge of it think that it should be treated like an evolutionary model. And also, there are factions that have broken away from Arachnos proper, and there is the rogue Arachnos faction. So, if you want to make something that uses the Arachnos pieces, or the Arachnos costumes, or just has the history of, like, I used to work for Arachnos, there's tons of options there. The outfits are strongly spider-themed, and the Fortunatas are these characters with psychic powers. I honestly would just normally point to the veteran epic archetypes, though, because Arachnos doesn't tend to offer anything unique that you don't already get from those sources, and because of the way those things work, like, say, the crab spider costume, you won't use the cool big robot tentacle arms on the back of the costume unless you belong to the class that has them. Carnival of Shadows. These are basically evil, happy party clowns. The Carnival of Shadows are a stylistically, violently colored group of psychic entities kind of maintaining a hive mind under the control of one woman who's sort of alive and sort of dead and sort of a ghost, and it's all very vague, and I don't want to go into too much detail about that. The way that they get depicted has a similar thread to Arachnos, which is, on one level, they might be seen as kind of like a singular hive mind with a singular purpose of endless hedonism, or they might be seen as having groups and factions and cells split up within them, which, honestly, in my opinion, that works, because part of the point of the Carnies is they are not mentally well. They are unified by an aesthetic of wearing masks or helmets, something to obscure the face, and the range of powers you will see with them tend to range between psychic and dark, with some of the illusion powers thrown in, and the melee types tend to use mace-like weapons or swords. There's also a couple of things that use fire powers, so you've got a lot of options there that spread across a lot of different archetypes. Personally, I think the idea of rogue Carnies is a really cool one, and you also have the Praetorian cousins of them, the Carnival of Light, that give you an in to, well, I look like a Carnie, but. The Circle of Thorns. Big lore dump here, missing, because it's not spoilery, it's just boring. The Circle of Thorns are kind of an antediluvian culture of mages who parasite themselves into other bodies, stabbing people with a dagger made of a thorn tree that lets them magically inhabit a new body. So they're almost all body-hopping parasites of the soul variety, and the thing is, when you want to make an enemy faction character, one of the normal tricks you do is like, I'm new, or I'm weak, or I'm fresh, so I don't really know a lot about what's going on. In the Circle of Thorns, every single member of the Circle of Thorns is several centuries old. They are all vessels for very old souls that are all working together, which must be immensely frustrating because it means that you've got this promotion tier system, which means after several centuries of working and doing like low schlubby robe dude stuff, you still haven't learned all the cool magic spells that let you get a big and fancy hat. I like them as a kind of like a plant vampire and a soul-eating kind of thing. They are a little one-note, and rogue factions do exist within the group, so you've got ways to split away and be individual. They tend to use dark powers or elemental powers, so if you want to lean into those, that's options too. They also have really stupid hats, though, so I don't like them. The classic just a robed guy Circle of Thorns look is actually, in my opinion, the best look they have outside of their monsters. The Coralax. The Coralax are kind of a parallel of Atlanteans in that they're this ancient civilization with mysterious powers whose world was destroyed because of a great sin, and also the Deep Ones from H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth. They are coral-encrusted humanoid creatures, but crucially they aren't humans. The Coralax are their own separate species of entity with their own existent culture. If you wanted to play a member of this culture, you're going to have to bear in mind you're going to be alien to a lot of experiences, or an experienced and practiced infiltrator. I would normally look to any of the power sets that get available spines. So, for example, spine scrappers, but also thorns or plant for blasters, which might be a problem because they don't necessarily line up with the other components of that visual aesthetic. But still, they also like psychic powers. If you fight against them in the Étoile, you'll very much see them using like mind blasts and stuff, and psychic screams. I actually have one of these, a character who, because they were shipping a lot of material from Sharkhead in the mines, wound up inhaling a lot of the transformative elements of the coral, and now they've got a secret identity that lets them turn into a Coralax to go around smashing people with big fists made of haunted coral. I think that's fun. Someone wanted to get up at me and say, look, we don't have any proof that Coralax turn people into Coralax. Like, you're absolutely right. You know, jump up my butt. Cray Corp. All-purpose, corrupt, evil organization Cray Corp. These people do a bunch of spoilery kind of stories, but basically there's a reason this faction drops off in the late game in City of Heroes and shows up in the late game in City of Villains. This is your amoral corporate executive types with your strangely policed level militarized factional elements. The Cray costumes you have available to you are very much of people for the most part. They don't do a lot of science monsters aside from their Paragon Protectors. Paragon Protectors can do anything. So any hero could put on the Paragon Protector outfit and you'd be like, yeah, this character used to be a Paragon Protector, but something changed. They are someone else now, and then they can take off the costume and go about trying to be a normal person. There's a whole bunch of fun story elements there if you are the kind of person who wants to dig into the lore of Cray Corp for that. Ultimately, Cray are a business, which means they probably don't really have any true believers working for it for the most part. The whole point of a system of corporate power like that is that it's an amoral money machine, and the greater evils of what any one person is doing are not visible to them. So the evil decisions are being made upstream, and the evil actions are being carried out downstream, so it's very easy to disconnect, say, being part of an evil company with what you're doing relating to the evil it's doing. It's a great place to go if you want to have someone be disillusioned or a corporate escapade. The Devouring Earth. The Devouring Earth are cool-looking nature monsters. Big crystals, big rocks, big mushrooms, and my favorite, the Devoured, which are stompy, tentacle-faced monster beasts with great big claws. These are technically symbiotes. They start by taking humans and transforming them into them, and there's a certain body horror element that work there. And if you're anything to do with Praetoria, the Devouring Earth characters would be horrifying, just terrifying things to see, because their world was destroyed by the Devouring Earth. And part of the point of their city was that it was meant to be the one place where they could guarantee there were no Devouring Earth. There's a very, very kind of purge and plague kind of vibe to these ones. I use a bunch of the Devouring Earth costumes because the Devoured is a great big cool looking stomping monster, and on Homecoming we have a couple of different coloured variants which I've used for different concepts. I feel this falls under monster, and it doesn't need to specifically be Devouring Earth. Drudges. These are basically Doctor Who ghost cops from one zone in the game. The Drudge is, by its nature, probably something your character actually is, and any non-Drudge looks people see of them are probably disguises, or remnants of past lives, or bodies they're hopping between. The Freak Show. Beloved Freak Show former number one farm target. These are goofy, fun-loving, ultimately extremely dangerous gangsters in the junky areas of the City of Heroes. You'll see them a lot in hazard zones and in the higher level content, where the whole point is these are people whose idea of party drugs are self-augmentation anti-rejection drugs called Excelsior. This means that you have all this kind of like really nasty garbage tech, almost Tank Girl style, jammed onto people. My big problem with this as a costume option is that you don't really put on or take off a freak show look. You are a freak show. You don't really have the option of like dismantling the tank and getting out of it if you have the tank body. So if you want to go this route and be a member of the freak show, or be a temporary member of the freak show, or a former member of the freak show, there's going to be a lot of reparative therapy and a lot of reparation to your body and development on that front. And you might wind up being better off just starting by making something freak show-ish in the character creator than using the character costume option here. One of the other things you have here is the Freak Lock, which is really unique in that it doesn't have legs, it floats. Goldbrickers. The Goldbrickers are an organized gang of thieves and heisters operating out of Cap Al Diabla in the Etoile, and their whole business functions out of a chocolate factory. There's some more homecoming content, the Dr. Aeon Strike Force, that expands on what they are and what they're like. If you're into this particular genre of like, we work together, we are serious business people in our crime, they're a good place to go. They have a unified aesthetic. They like the gold and bug kind of gear, and they use a specific type of jetpack. Pretty much any kind of technological hero type. If you want to play an archetype that's got a gun or a set of tools or toys, traps, devices, that kind of thing, or say a robot's mastermind, they all probably fit really well under Goldbrickers. The Lost. All right, big spoiler warning here. But the Lost are a group of transformed humans who develop psychic powers and have access to the chunky Richti weapons because they are related to the Richti. They tend to recruit homeless people, and there's a plot arc about healing them of their disease, but not stopping them from becoming Richtified again, which is something of an awkward, what's wrong with this setting kind of problem, which most people I know just ignore and sweep under the rug, because curing this would be very strange. They have a strong trash aesthetic and some unique costume pieces, like the helmet that's a TV. You can't really do that any other way. And body-wise, you can get close to some of them size-wise. So you could definitely make a character whose normal costumes didn't look like a member of the Lost, and then you take off, then you put on the costume and the size more or less wraps up. So it looks like your character is just putting on different clothes and armor. That's an option. The Prelate and Anathema are much more inhuman. I like them as a vibe for a threatening kind of monster person, and we know that they can disguise themselves as humans with shape-shifting powers. So if you wanted to play a kind of a monstrous psionic character who goes about their day pretending to be something they're not, that's a place to start. I also just think the Prelate has a pretty cool vibe to it in general. The Nemesis Army. The Nemesis Army is a group of clockwork soldiers and possibly some actual humans, but it's never made explicitly clear in any trustworthy way, and the level of complexity in these plots run by Nemesis are so elaborate that it is in fact a joke from the developers at several points. If you want to play a character who's like a former clockwork soldier, a humanoid like that, you don't need the Nemesis costume to do it, because they make clockwork robots that look like anything. There's a whole set of stuff that where the only thing that marks them out as being Nemesis is the type of weapon they wield. So you could go with that route. That said, this does offer you two unique robot-y options, one of which is the Warhulk, which is a great big chunky suit with a kind of like a wet tank that your character is vaguely shadowed in, which could be a great place to go if you want to play a character who like stole or hijacked or remodeled one of these big Warhulks and strapped on their own unique kind of weaponry to. But also, because of the nature of it having a big globby tank, you might want to make it so like it's like an LCL or concentration or sensory deprivation tank, and that lets your character's psychic powers come out or something like that. The Warhulk feels like a thing that exists in the universe, so it's very easy to imagine a character repurposing that thing. The other robot they have is the fake Nemesis, which is it's a copy of the arch villain that runs the group, Nemesis. If you're really deep into the lore of the type of universe it is, you can imagine a whole bunch of fake Nemesis ideas, including like this robot thinks it's the real Nemesis, or this robot thinks the ultimate Nemesis plot is to become a hero, or this is the real Nemesis that can't convince anyone that it is the real Nemesis. All sorts of different ideas there. But it would very much be tying it to that one specific lore faction. And you might want to have to live in the robot all the time because no one knows what Nemesis actually looks like. The Paragon Police! ACAB! But special mention in this grouping is the PPD Hardsuit. You can fine-tune your height and skin tone pretty closely to make it look like when you activate this power, it is a suit your character is putting on. The suit does do a lot to conceal the body shape, so you could even have it be, as it were, a cross-gender. The Hardsuit reads as pretty male. If you look really close, there's some stubble on the chin that's visible, but nothing that you can't route around if you're paying attention. And if people are going to forgive a lot. These Hardsuits use conventionally energy melee moves and energy blast moves, so if you play a character who has access to those, this could be a great place to pick those up. Any defender with the energy blast power set probably looks great with this. Well, maybe not Plant, but your empathies, your pains, your kinetics, they probably all work really well with this suit. The Ricti. So, again, big spoiler note here, but the Ricti are a sort of human-like alien. If you've played through the story, you will know more, but odds are good going to see and deal with Ricti and learn what they are just from other players by osmosis. Ricti have a distinct manner of speech, and they wind up being in part allied with heroes, so there's room to play cool Ricti using all these costume pieces, and there are a lot of them for very specific different tasks, like the Magi use elemental powers, the Mentalists use telepathy, the Headmen just use swords. So, if you want to use guns and swords, you've got an option here. There aren't a lot of characters who get access to both guns and swords. I think that's just blasters using the pulse rifle and ninja pairing. But psychic powers are pretty easily represented in all sorts of different other power sets. You could make a pyrokinetic Ricti using Fire Blast or the like, and just say, look, psychic powers expressed this way. The Ricti, you almost certainly are going to be able to find someone role-playing a Ricti now we have these costumes, because they absolutely whip, and lots of people already had, Ricti-adjacent kind of characters. The Ricti War was a defining cultural event in setting, so you'll find a lot of people who have firm opinions on it, both good and bad. And that's it. That's our conclusion. This is just a crash course on some of these factions and how you could integrate them into your vision with a heroic or villainous character. The options spread out before you. I deliberately try to keep it vague and not become one of those 3-hour-long, I'm going to go into the history of each of these groups thing, partly because it's just too bloody hot right now, but also because I think that the more information you have, if it's presented to you in a way you didn't discover it, it can run the risk of making you feel like there is a correct way to be. And plus, this is a game that's almost 20 years old and has multiple lore rewrites in its history. Chances are I've forgotten something or I'm remembering something wrong. But this should give you a place to start as ways to look at these prismatic costumes as a new toy, a new way to play. And they excite me because I'm looking at existing characters I had where I was kind of bored with what they were. Maybe they could be something exciting if I made them change.